Hi, everybody. Welcome to the first webinar presented by the South Carolina Writers Workshop. I'm Trilby Plants, President. Through our workshops, our webinars, we hope to provide content to hone your skills and help you grow as writers. If there's anybody who does not see this, could you please use the chat feature and let us know? And also, if you did not get a handout, I won't get it sent out for a few minutes, but if you let us know in the chat feature, I will get it sent. Ready? Ginny Padgett, our President ex officio, will introduce today's speaker.
Hi, everyone. And I am so excited to welcome you this morning and to be a part of our inaugural webinar series. And here's what you can expect during this hour. 45 minutes of instruction with 15 minutes for a question and answer period. As we go through this hour, if you have any questions, please check this using the chat feature. It's over on the, you should see it on the right side of your screen. And at the end of the instruction, our presenter will address your questions. At this time, I'm proud to introduce one of our own, S. Jane Gary. She's a member of SCWW Camden. S. Jane Gary is a 3-time Pushcart Prize nominee and award-winning author. She lives in Elgin, South Carolina with her husband and daughter. Jane met her agent at an SCWW conference during a pitch session. That relationship resulted in the publication of her memoir, Losing the Dollhouse, with Touchpoint Press in February of 2015. In addition, she has a novel under literary contract, and she's working on another book for the Idiot's Guide series, which will be published through a division of Penguin Random House next year. Jane is a firm believer that balance brings sanity. While writing an emotional abuse book that recounts real-life family drama and betrayal, she made time to pen some lighthearted potty humor flush this book. When Jane's not writing, she's running her tutoring business, PalmettoTutors.com, and editing other people's manuscripts. Now, here's Jane to lead us through this morning's topic. First pages, solid beginnings that hook readers.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I hope everybody can see me and hear me okay. Please feel free to use the message feature, the chat feature at any time if you have questions throughout today, and then I'll field them at the end of the hour. We're going to talk today about a subject that gives me, as a writer, a lot of anxiety, and that is first pages. And I think that first pages give most writers anxiety because that is what you know is going to be your introduction to the story. It's your gateway into the world that you're building. And when you get to the point where you're thinking about maybe publishing your work and having other people look at it, you start to hear about these all-important first pages. When I first learned about just how important they were, you would think it would be as a reader because that's what draws us into a story, but it was actually at a South Carolina Writers Workshop conference. And this was several years ago when I first started attending conferences. And one of the things that the SCWW has done at their conferences is offer these sessions called slush fests. And if you've never attended one of these, I highly recommend it. There have been other Penn Writers and North Carolina Writers Network and a lot of other regional writers conferences have these types of sessions as well. And they're highly useful because what they do, they have authors, agents, and editors present. And they go through just the first 2 pages of manuscripts. And then the agents and the editors tell you why they would keep reading after those first few sentences or why they would stop. And that was something that was really eye-opening for me, because sometimes as writers, we forget to be readers. And that is a perspective that you really need to keep in mind when you're editing. Not necessarily when you're writing, but when you're editing. And we'll talk about the difference between those two perspectives as you're approaching a manuscript. But the first pages, because they are someone's foray into your story, are going to make or break that deal. You know, you are laying the foundation for the tone and the theme and the character journey that you're inviting somebody to take with you. And so you have to make sure that that is laid very delicately. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to do that today, and how to conquer the anxiety of, first of all, just getting started, all right, and then going back and editing. And if first pages give you anxiety, I mean, you really are not alone. It's something that with my memoir, they were speaking about my memoir, Losing the Dollhouse. I think I rewrote the first pages of that memoir at least 20 times, and I'm really not exaggerating in saying that. In fact, the first 20 pages actually ended up being cut out altogether. It was really just me trying to figure out a way to start. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, think about just the beginning of anything, any endeavor in your life. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to go down wrong paths, and you're going to have to make corrections, go back, and that is, writing is no different. It's a very messy process, and so I think we need to just kind of take a deep breath and allow ourselves permission to make those mistakes and get messy, because that's where the real magic will happen. Because when you write and rewrite and edit and proofread those pages, what you're doing is similar to Michelangelo's philosophy of sculpture. If you've never heard Michelangelo's philosophy of sculpture, he basically felt like you were looking at this big piece of marble or stone, or whatever his medium was going to be, and then you needed to chip away everything else and find that masterpiece that was lying hidden in the stone somewhere. And so your blank page is a lot like that stone. It's in there somewhere, but you have to chip away at all these rough edges and all of this extra stuff that we just love to dump in there, because we're just figuring out a way to start. So that happened to me when I was writing my memoir, for sure. I had 20 pages that nobody is interested in seeing. I mean, it's on a disc somewhere that I have, but I'm probably not going to show it to anybody. Maybe I could mine it for something I could use as an article or an essay. I mean, don't ever get rid of the things that you slough off of your draft. Save them in a file. They might come in useful one day, but I don't know. These 20 pages that I had at the beginning of my book were really bad. They were really bad. I finished editing a novel a few months ago, and it was the same thing. And actually, my wonderful group of beta readers and then the critique partners that I have found in the Camden chapter of the South Carolina Writers Workshop can attest that I have written and rewritten the first chapter of my novel. It is nowhere near what I first started writing. And the way that the story itself turned out is nowhere near the initial path that I thought that the story was going to take. So again, give yourself permission to just explore those ideas and make those mistakes. And they really do start with, step one, which is conquering that blank page. All right, that's what we'll talk about first, and then we'll talk about how to write for yourself and then edit for the reader. And those are really main concepts that you need to have in mind. All right, so let's look at some things that you can do to conquer the blank page. All right, what I'm going to do is share my screen with you, and hopefully this feature will work. All right, and I have just some notes that we can look at together. All right, and we can talk about how to get started, how to edit, how to go through these processes. All right, so first pages, all right, this is what I promised you today, right? Solid beginnings that are going to hook your readers. That's what we're going for, right? Think about books that you've read and how they began. you wanted to keep going. After that first sentence, that first paragraph, a little breadcrumb trail was led for you, and you wanted to keep going because you were enticed and you were intrigued and curious, and that's what you want to do for your readers. However, it doesn't always begin like that when you're actually in the trenches of the process, so to speak. All right, first and foremost, when you are past the point of drafting and you're past the messy point and you're really trying to hone that piece of stone like you're Michelangelo and you're approaching your book like a sculptor, all right, you want to keep in mind that a book is a promise. You pick that book up and there is an intrinsic promise just in the art form in general. All right, a book's opening pages must command the reader's attention. Those first sentences make the sale. All right, now a lot of us don't like to think of ourselves as salespeople. That's very clinical, and I get it. I don't like to think of that, a book as a sale either, but it really is. I mean, you're really selling a story. You're selling an idea, and you need to put that best foot forward at the beginning. All right? Those first sentences make the sale. They seal the pact between author and reader. And what is that pact? What is that promise? You're saying there is a journey in these pages, and it will be worth your time. If you've never read Stephen King's On Writing, I highly recommend that you do. I mean, I've read it and reread it, and I like to reread certain parts of it, especially when I'm approaching the editing process, because it helps me keep very present in my conscious mind my purpose and what I'm trying to do with story and how I'm trying to engage readers. Because otherwise you're just keeping a diary. There's nothing wrong with keeping a diary, but if you want to engage somebody in a story, then you have to approach your art a little bit differently. And this is where I absolutely adore what Stephen King's definition of writing is. Telepathy, of course. All the arts depend on telepathy to some degree, but I believe that writing offers the purest distillation. I'm not trying to be cute. There is a point to be made. You can approach the act of writing with nervousness, excitement, hopefulness, or even despair, the sense that you can never completely put on the page what's in your mind and heart. You can come to the act with your fists clenched and your eyes narrowed, or because you want to change the world. Come to it anyway, but lightly. Let me say it again. You must not come lightly to the blank page. Right, now that's a lot of pressure, but it's worth having that attitude, all right? Because this is where that idea of writing for yourself and editing for the reader comes in. You get to that beginning however you can, all right? But then once you start editing, then this is not just about you anymore. This is about how someone else is going to receive your telepathic message, and that's a serious thing. All right, so how do we go about writing and editing those first pages and try to keep our focus at the forefront of our consciousness? All right, these are 6 guiding principles that I use for writing and editing those first pages, and I'm going to share them with you today, and I really hope that they help you. They certainly have helped me. All right, write for yourself, edit for the reader. All right. That is basically just what we've been talking about, getting out those messy birth pangs and not caring what it looks like, not caring what it sounds like. All right, that's really what you need to do. All right, so how do you get that out? All right, well, when you're drafting and you're just trying to get your ideas out, don't write to a trend. All right, this is about writing for yourself. When I say that, I mean don't think about what's popular right now, what's selling right now. This is something that I've also taken away from many conferences that I've attended. And I'll actually try to go back and forth to you being able to see me as well. All right, because I do want to talk about this, this idea of a trend. One of the things that I think that the Twilight books has done to modern fiction is it had everybody thinking, wow, those were so wildly successful. I want to do that too. How do I do that too? And then there were people who would actually say, well, you know, I want to sell what I'm writing. I want to publish it and be successful. I'll just do what's trending. Vampires are trending. But then you heard all these agents and editors saying, if I see one more vampire book, I'm going to take a stake and drive it through my own heart. They just wanted to kill that trend. So what you want to make sure that you do first and foremost is that you're writing about something that you personally feel passionate about. You have to believe in that story, because if you don't believe in it, then no one else is going to either. I mean, if you don't care, why should we? So when you're staring at that blank page and you're just trying to conquer it, because it really is a nemesis to a lot of us when we're trying to get some traction with a project, don't think as you're writing about how it's going to be received. That comes when you're editing. So that's the primary difference between writing for yourself and editing for the reader. When you write, you better put your heart and soul into it and make sure that you give it some gusto. And don't think about how it's going to be received and what the trends are. Don't think about the Hunger Games or Divergent or these other middle grade things. Certainly don't think about 50 Shades of Grey. That's some of the, if you're a fan, I'm sorry, but that's just some of the worst writing just out there. And she got very lucky because there are a lot of people out there who will pick that up and really eat it up. But if writing erotica is something that you're passionate about, at least make sure that's good too. All right, so don't worry about writing to a trend. All right, so I hope everybody can also still see my presentation here, because we're going to move on to the next part. All right. When you're drafting, don't write to a trend. Be passionate about your subject. And then after you've done that, after you have bled out onto the page, all right, you want to make sure that you get some distance from that manuscript. All right, put it away in a drawer somewhere. A couple of weeks, maybe a couple of months. I mean, don't not write anything in that process. That's when you start your new project. Get those creative juices continuing to flow. But once you're done with the manuscript, if it's a short story, if it's a novel, if it's a memoir, if it's a nonfiction book, whatever it is, just put it aside and get some distance. Right? And while it's sitting there and it's kind of fermenting, germinating, whatever you want to call it, taking a break, all right, then you want to make sure that you start considering your audience. I mean, ideally, you know who that is while you're writing, but sometimes you don't, because you're writing for yourself. All right, but when you go back to edit those first pages especially, because that's what's going to be your hook, you want to make sure you know what type of person, what type of interests and sensibilities and passions is the receiving end of your telepathic message going to have. All right? And once you know your audience, then you can approach editing. All right? And when you approach editing, you want to make sure that you have a team of people to help you. All right? You might want to go through the draft yourself before you let anybody look at it or touch it. All right? But it's incredibly important to build a support network, all right, of other writers and readers, and they're going to help you revise your work. You're going to take their input, and you're going to take it with grains of salt, because you're the one in charge of your mission, but you do want to have other eyes look at it, all right? Because if you don't, then you really are missing out on a wealth of experiences and perceptions that other people have as writers and readers that are going to help you make sure that your telepathic message is being received in the way you want it to, all right? And if there are like 6 people in your editing group and 5 of them say, okay, this really works, and 1 of them says it doesn't, well, then maybe you can be a little bit dismissive of that comment and say, well, not to their face, but you can say, you know what, maybe they're not my target audience, but these other 5 are in consensus with what I'm doing, so you just kind of go with your gut on that, all right? Conquering that blank page. All right. Before you're showing it to anybody, there are a lot of different techniques that people use to just get past that first page. Outlining, brainstorming. Those are 2 things that are my personal favorites. I actually had an extensive outline for my memoir because I had to try to make sure that I had dates and everything straight, and I wanted to make sure that I was being accurate, and I wanted to make sure that when I approached how I was going to address my personal timeline to the reader, that it was going to make sense. So I needed an outline to keep myself straight, so that I could keep the reader straight and find threads that were going to connect them and root them into the setting. Right? Brainstorming is, however, it comes out. I mean, it could be a list. It can be one of those idea webs that people, they're drawing circles and arrows are going all over the place. It can be very messy, but it can be very helpful just to kind of unclog what is, the great myth of writer's block. Right now, this third one, using writing prompts to generate ideas. This is something I was really resistant to at first, but I have to tell you that the idea for a YA book that I'm going to start writing in a few months came from a writing prompt at a conference. And it just ended up being a really cool idea. They just had you, the writing prompt was just about you going to a space in your own life where you felt like your world was about to fall apart. And I thought, well, I already wrote this memoir about my world falling apart. I don't want to do that. But then it took me to an entirely different place in my life, and then all of a sudden this character came to me, and it wasn't about me, it was about her and what she was dealing with, and about a medical crisis that her mother was having, and it had nothing to do with me anymore, and it became this entirely different life of its own. So sometimes if you're feeling blocked, you know, there are so many resources online. Like if you really just Google writing prompt, there are really cool sites that come up and they can help you get unblocked if you're staring at something that looks like this blank page over here. The other thing that you can do, and this is something that I did with my novel, was just latched on to an idea and I just started writing without censoring yourself. That is so important. All right, when you're writing for yourself first, all right, because a lot of us, and I am spending a lot of time talking today about how other people receive your work and editing for other people. Right? That is incredibly important when you want to share. But when you are drafting, don't censor yourself. First of all, it takes a long time to do that, and you keep writing and rewriting the same sentence over and over again, thinking about an audience as you're writing, and that's just going to squash your creative spirit. So try your best just to write that draft without censoring yourself. Trust me, there is plenty of time to do that later. Then you do what I told you to do before. You get some distance from your story. All right? And one of the things that you do when you're editing is decide on the best beginning. All right? And this speaks to what I talked to you about before with my memoir and the first 20 pages of it that will probably never see the light of day because they're just really that awful and confusing and unnecessary. How do you do that? How do you decide on what's going to be the best foray into your story? All right? You look at your draft and you try to look at it as honestly as you can. All right? And here's where it gets hard because this is about what people call killing your darlings. Some of us, we don't want to do that, and especially if the sentence is really well written or the paragraph has this beautiful description that you've kind of become attached to. It's hard to start killing those darlings, but kill them you must, right? So if you are reading it with some distance, you should be able to tell if it doesn't get good until the third paragraph, all right? Well, so then get rid of it, all right? Get rid of it and start where it gets good, all right? If it doesn't get good until chapter 3, start there, all right? Same thing. And that's where it does become hard because you feel like you've put a lot of hard work into it. But this is where you are now editing and slashing and burning with the reader in mind, all right? Are you laying a proper breadcrumb trail, or are you dumping information that we don't need? And this is where we take a lesson from the ancient Greeks, who began all of their masterworks in medias res, which just means in the middle of things. All right, you weave in backstory on a need-to-know basis. All right, like the Odyssey is an example of this. We all had to read that in school, or most of us did. I hope that that they're still reading it in school. But that is a classic, epic story. All right, and even that doesn't begin with info dumping. I mean, they knew this millennia ago. It begins with Odysseus on an island being held captive by a goddess who is making him be her love slave. Hello, I'm interested. Are you interested? You know, so that, I mean, they even knew that then. All right, it starts off on that island, and then it tells you, oh, and by the way, he was in the Trojan War, and this all happened, and things are happening at home, and his world is falling apart. But first, we're on an island with him, and we know that he's being held against his will by this goddess who wants him to be her love slave. All right, now, how do you make sure that your story is beginning in the best place possible? All right, you're looking at your chapter and you're trying to think of how the reader's going to perceive it. All right, well, the best thing that you can do is rewrite and edit the opening paragraphs until they reveal the big four. You have to make sure that you've introduced your protagonist and that you are explaining to the reader what they're like, what's their personality, all of that. Right? You have to have an inciting incident or conflict. Right? This is an absolute must. I once had a writing student who decided she was going to write a story with no conflict in it. I don't know why she did that. She was a very sweet girl, and I think that she just thought conflict was just so messy, and why do we have to be mean? Right? And it was the most boring story in the world. And she saw that after she was done writing it. You have to have conflict, and you have to have it from the very first paragraph. Okay, we need to have some kind of problem. Otherwise, everybody's just smiling at each other, having a nice cup of coffee, and that's not interesting. We need to know what your setting is. And this is important. You don't have to have, you know, the exact date, time, state, town, all of that. But we need some brushstroke of detail that grounds us in the scene. Otherwise, the reader might feel like they're floating in space a little bit. All right? You don't necessarily have to do that in the very first couple of lines, but you better do it on the first page, or people will feel a little lost. Right? And what does your protagonist need or want? And this is very important. This is what is often referred to as the stakes. What is at stake for this person? Why should we be rooting for them or rooting against them? Are they a hero? Are they an anti-hero? What drives them? What's their motivation? We need to be invested in them emotionally somehow, and telling us what the protagonist needs or wants is the best way to do that. Right, these are 3 common pitfalls that kill tension and break your promise to your readers in those first couple of pages. So you want to make sure that you don't do this. This will also help you make sure that you are addressing the big 4 in the best, most dynamic way that you can for your story. Right? You don't want to include dialogue that doesn't reveal character. Right? There's just no point to that, and we'll talk about that in a minute here. You also don't want to engage in what's called info dumping. This is when you give tons of information about everything that happened before this moment of conflict and tension that you are introducing that should come first. All right? We don't need to know where they were born, how they were born. You know, you can weave those in seamlessly as you go along with your story, and we'll talk about how to do that in a moment. You also want to avoid cliche openings and descriptions, and I'll give you some examples of those and why they are really just mood killers, and they're a big turnoff to readers because cliches really insult people's intelligence. All right, so dialogue that doesn't reveal character. All right. Here's the thing, like, why bother? It's pedestrian, it's boring, you know, get to the good stuff. Here's what I see myself doing in what I call first draft blues, and what I see other writers doing as well in their early drafts. We feel compelled to take the character from point A to point B. Right? And when we do that, we show them doing things like talking about getting breakfast together, talking about you know, going to work, and those kinds of conversations are realistic and they happen, and you should include realistic conversation if that's the world that you're building. But make sure that when you do, that there's a purpose. It's not just exposition, it's not just filler or moving the character from one room to another. You don't have to do that. You can write in vignettes. If there's conversation, make sure that it reveals something about that character's motivation, what's important to them, their relationship to other people. You can weave in little tidbits about that person's past. Just make sure that it is the natural flow of conversation. Right now, info dumping is something that some people often do in dialogue that doesn't reveal character, but they can also do it in exposition, especially in those first couple of paragraphs. You have to avoid this like the plague. It is a major turnoff to readers. You weave in backstory as you go. All right? Think of the people you meet in real life. You haven't known them all since birth. You learn their secrets over time. Give your characters that same aspect of real life. Even if you're writing science fiction or high fantasy, you still weave that backstory in, and you still learn secrets about people and their past over time through natural dialogue and through little pieces of exposition that you weave in naturally as you're going through the most interesting parts of the story. And in those first paragraphs, you want to avoid cliche openings and descriptions. All right, and here are some things that I've actually gleaned from agents and editors over the years in slush pile sessions at conferences who said that when they see this stuff, they just immediately go to the next email, the next query in their mailbox, and hope that the person isn't doing something like this. So you really need to avoid these. And readers don't like them either, all right, because they said, oh, wow, this is like 20 other books I've read. All right, no weather descriptions in the first line unless it's in a characterizing voice. And by that I mean if it's in first person and your character has a really unique voice and maybe they are complaining about the weather in a way that only they can do, okay, then you can get away with it, right? But otherwise, I don't start off with, it was a sunny, humid day, no. All right, that's just something that is a major turnoff to most readers and certainly agents and editors. All right, no dark and stormy nights, please. No waking up from a dream. Right? This has been done many times. Someone bolts out of their bed and they're sweating, and then you learn what's bothering them. There are other ways that you can show what's bothering them, what their fears are. You can show that through conversation. You can show that through internal thought, but you don't need to have them waking up for a dream. Or worse yet, describe the dream, and then a couple paragraphs later, they're waking up from that dream. And the readers sometimes feel like they've been duped when you do that. All right, you promise them this exciting dreamscape, and then 3 paragraphs later they wake up. You also don't want to have your character waking up in the morning, looking at an alarm clock, starting their routine, unless you have a really unique spin on that. All right, and also you want to not have your character look into a mirror so that the reader learns what they look like. There are other ways that you can do that. Those types of descriptions have really been beaten to death, and so you want to make sure that you find more unique ways to engage the reader and come up with unique descriptions. All right, and the last thing that you really need to do, and this is something that when we're trying to carve out time for ourselves to write, we often forget to do, and that is study examples of what works and learn from them. All right, for every 1,000 words that you write yourself, you should be reading at least double that. And that's because we learn by emulation, and we learn by examples of people who have done things successfully and done things well. All right, so keep reading and make sure that you are taking into account what engages you about their writing as well. You can read for enjoyment, but sometimes read with a student's perspective. All right, because we're all students of writing, and we'll look at a couple of examples if we have time in a minute here. While you are studying those examples, all right, and while you are rewriting and editing your own pages, you want to keep in mind that even though you want to be engaging, high drama is not always possible in the very first line. All right, your goal is to intrigue and entice the reader to read the next sentence and then the one after that. All right, you're laying a breadcrumb trail. You're not throwing a grenade. All right, and this is the mistake I think that some people make when they're kind of hyper-correcting their editing process, because maybe they had a lot of info dumping. Maybe they had a lot of backstory, and they think, you know what, I'm going to start off with someone getting shot, I'm going to start off with a bomb going off. All right, now, you can do that. All right, you can have that big bang at the beginning, but only if it means something, only if it makes sense to your story. Right? That's one of the ways you keep a promise to your reader. You don't want to start off with a big explosion and then the rest of your story is kind of this quiet, intensely emotional family drama. Okay, you totally just broke a promise to a reader then. You promised them some kind of story that sounded like espionage was going to be involved and then quieted down. You need to make sure that your entry point to your story makes sense to your characters and their motivation and what they want. Right? And you want to make sure that it is engaging and that it makes sense to your story. If you remember those big 4, you're going to keep that promise. You need to know these things. Really, ideally, you know them before you start writing. All right? But you might not until you're really editing it. You want to know who your protagonist is and what they are like. What's the inciting incident or conflict? What is your setting? What does your protagonist need or want? And make sure that your readers know that too. If you know it, then your readers can know it. All right, let's look at some examples from modern and contemporary literature that really, really work and do all of these things well. And we only have time to really look at first sentences and first paragraphs of a couple of examples. All right, but you'll see that right away they tell us at least what the protagonist is like. and there's some kind of conflict. Now, the conflict doesn't have to be laid out in exact detail, all right? That becomes info dumping, but it's enough to intrigue us, and we have to get some idea of setting, and we have to get some idea of what the protagonist needs or wants. All right, this is from The Lovely Bones by Alice Sebold. All right, this is the very first paragraph of the book. My name was Salmon, like the fish. First name Susie. I was 14 when I was murdered on December 6, 1973. In newspaper photos of missing girls from the 70s, most look like me. White girls with mousy brown hair. This was before kids of all races and genders started appearing on milk cartons or in the Daily Mail. It was still back when people believed things like that didn't happen. Now, if this isn't your cup of tea, that's fine. This is very subjective, all right? But I personally love this book, and a lot. This was obviously a bestseller. It was made into a blockbuster film, and there are a lot of people of all ages who engaged fully with this book, which is why I chose it. And when I read it, that first sentence, I actually stopped and went, wow. I mean, I admired it as I was reading it. You know, this gives us right away. We know who the character is. We have the voice. We know that obviously it's in first person, so we're going to be intimately involved with this girl who is telling us how she was killed. We also know the setting, all right? And even though it can sound a little clinical, it'd be like, you know, December 6, 1973, this is not clinical at all, because we are already told that she's going to be murdered. We already care. We already have a sense of her voice. Because she's young, that already kind of lends our sensibilities and our sympathies to her. We know what she looks like, all right? And she did it in a different way, all right? She's telling us that she looks like most other, you know, white girls who were missing at the time, you know, and so we know something about her attitude, the way that she sees the world, and we know something about the world that she lives in, all right? That people still didn't believe that things like that happened at the time, but it doesn't mean that they didn't, and we know what kind of story that we're in for. Okay? All right, here's an example that is really just a classic favorite, all right, from The Catcher in the Rye. Now, this doesn't give as much detail as Alice Sebold's example did, but what this does brilliantly is voice, all right? Also first person. If you really want to hear about it, the first thing you'll probably want to know is where I was born and what my lousy childhood was like and how my parents were occupied and all before they had me and all that David Copperfield kind of crap. But I don't feel like going into it if you want to know the truth. Right now, if you've never read Catcher in the Rye, it's really a brilliant study in how to create voice and how to create a very flawed character that people can relate to nonetheless because they see themselves in that person's flaws. I mean, we can hear this, you know, right now, that the person is a little bit immature and that they're highly cynical. And we get an impression of the voice, you know, right off the bat. The conversational tone of it, we just are drawn in right away. Now he breaks some rules of using a lot of adverbs and a little bit of info dumping without it being info dumping, but he does it in a way where, you know, you can break the rules if you know how to break them well. Now here's an example of just the first sentence and how it can grab you. All right, this is from 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Many years later, as he faced the firing squad, Colonel Orellano Buendia was to remember that distant afternoon when his father took him to discover ice. That's a very loaded first sentence. All right, we already know that we are dealing with third person, but it's third person close, all right? We're close to this colonel. We know that he is facing a firing squad. So right off the bat, we're like, why is this person being executed? And then we see him having this memory. Is it a tender memory? We're not sure, but it involves his father. And where does this person live where his father takes him to discover ice? You know, we already have an intrigue about the setting. We have an intrigue about the conflict, about what drives the character to end up in a situation where he's facing a firing squad. There's a lot going on here. All right, here's another classic book that a lot of us had to read in high school. This is from 1984 by George Orwell. It was a bright, cold day in April, and the clocks were striking 13. Winston Smith, his chin nuzzled into his breast in an effort to escape the vile wind, slipped quickly through the glass doors of Victory Mansions, though not quickly enough to prevent a swirl of gritty dust from entering along with him. Now, if you've never read 1984, it is a dystopian novel. It was written in 1948, or rather, it was published in 1948, and so he's telling about a dystopian future from his perspective when he was writing. And you already know that this is about a time when everything is off. I mean, you may be familiar with military time, but clocks don't strike 13. All right, you may use a 24-hour clock, but certainly that's not the tradition. So a clock striking 13, we already know that something is very off about this world. So George Orwell does a fantastic job of letting us know that something is terribly wrong, which is a small and unusual detail. Right? And then we are introduced to the protagonist right away, and we already have a hint through the setting and through him just dealing with a gritty dust, coming in with him, that we know that something is wrong and that there's some kind of tension and that there's a force beyond him that seems to be, grinding up against him. All right, and so that is, just a really good way of building a world and doing the big four all in that first paragraph. All right, now here's a wildly successful book, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, for those of you interested in YA and writing YA. This is just the first paragraph of the entire, of the first book. And look at how she lays the groundwork here. Mr. and Mrs. Dursley of No. 4 Privet Drive were proud to say that they were perfectly normal, thank you very much. They were the last people you'd expect to be involved in anything strange or mysterious because they just didn't hold with such nonsense. Now, I mean, right away, we get the voice of these characters, even though they're not speaking. We know that they're a little bit stuffy, that their lives are completely ordinary, and there's a hint that because they feel that way, and they use the word, the author uses the phrase, you would never expect them to be involved in anything strange or mysterious. We already know that it's now promised to us that something strange and mysterious is going to happen. All right. So these are all things that you want to keep in mind. All right, when you yourself are writing your first paragraphs. All right, and you want to be able to to do that. All right. You want.
Jane, I'm sorry to interrupt, but
that's fine.
That's time, so anytime.
Okay, so if somebody has question, I'd be happy to take your questions. I'm not sure if someone's going to feed me the questions. I do see that someone had a question about there was more than one page to the handout, and there is not. There was just one. I wanted to try to be as concise as possible and just kind of use that as an outline. If any of you have any of your own concerns to share about what you go through when you're trying to conquer that blank page or edit that blank page, you can certainly feel free to share them. I really do want to reiterate the importance, though, of writing for yourself first. I mean, when we look at professional examples, sometimes it might seem intimidating to say, okay, how do I get mine to look like that? Right? And the answer really is time. It's about time. It's about perseverance. And it's about getting to the point where you're not writing in isolation anymore. All right? That you're showing that work to somebody else and that you're okay getting their input and putting your ego at the door and putting it aside for a moment and saying, okay, this is my baby, this is my story, but now I want to take this and make it accessible. Now I want to engage in the telepathic process that Stephen King uses to define writing. And to do that, you need to make sure that you are putting on the page something that is what the reader will be receptive to. And part of that is knowing your audience also.
Jane, unfortunately, none of your screen showed, and
Oh, no.
I'm so sorry we didn't want to interrupt and blow your train of mind, but could you send all those things that you intended for us to see? Would you email them to Tippy, and then she can email them to everybody else?
Oh, absolutely. I am so sorry. I wish that you had actually just said, because it was probably me just having to press the button again to screen share. But I will, I'll send my presentation as an attachment, and then because I wanted you to be able to see the passages, you know, instead of just having, you know, me read them. But I hope that you were still able to glean something from that.
I think it was very helpful. I think it will be very helpful if people can see that in writing. But you were so easy to follow along. And I do have your first question. It's from Tibby. How do you feel about prologues as openers?
All right, now I hear a lot of mixed reception about this from agents and editors, all right? But it really depends on how you do it, all right? And it also depends on your genre, all right? Now, I'm a little prejudiced about this because my memoir has a prologue, so I felt like it was necessary in my case to have this scene that was an umbrella under which all of the emotional tension and the rest of the story could fall under that umbrella. All right? And I felt like it really was a scene that encapsulated the mood at the entire book. If you feel like you have such a scene, then go for it. All right? But make it you have to make them short. You don't want this long, drawn-out prologue and then it just goes away, and then you really start your story. That's the danger with prologues. If you feel like the prologue introduces a lot of minor characters and introduces something that happened in the far distant past, and then your first chapter 1 is someone in a different generation from the prologue, and that first chapter is actually more engaging, then really the best thing to do with that prologue might be to find a way to break it up into smaller chunks and weave it in seamlessly as you go along as backstory. All right, but that being said, it really is it's something that can be very useful if it is a scene that only involves 1 or 2 characters and is something that really encapsulates a major theme or a major mood that's going to pervade the whole piece. So really that's it. If it's something like that, that definitely include it, but if it's something that is purely expositional, then weave it in as backstory as you go along.
I have a question from myself, and it's very esoteric. I don't know if there's an answer, but here's the question. How do you know when you're finished editing? How do you know when your work is finished?
I have to say that that's been, as someone who, I'm a little bit type A, so for me personally, that's hard. And I had a really hard time when I was going through my memoir, because I was supposed to be finished. And this is this is a little bit of a sidetrack, but one of the benefits of working with a small press, with that project I worked with a small press, and when they gave me what was supposed to be my galley copy, which means that you're not supposed to be making any major changes anymore, you're only checking really as the author, even though they've checked it, you're just checking one more time to make sure that there's not a stray period or you know, some paragraph that got the last word cut off. You're checking for those types of things. And then in the case of my memoir, since I had to change so many names, I was checking to make sure that all those names had been changed. And I found, because I had just reread Stephen King's On Writing, I found so many adverbs that were so unnecessary, and it killed me to see them on the page. and I was supposed to be done. I wasn't supposed to be making any other changes. But as I couldn't read the galley without feeling sick to my stomach, because I thought it looked really amateurish to have so many what I felt were extraneous adverbs. And my editor and my agent were very kind to me, and they said, we didn't notice that because we were engaged with your story. But I was editing, and I could not be objective in that way and try to read it for the first time because I was reading it for the 120th time. So they were very kind and let me go through and cut out extraneous adverbs. And I have to say that it's a much tighter book now. So I know that's not completely answering it because I could have been done. I could have just said, I'm not going to edit this anymore. But I really did feel in my heart and soul that I had to do it one more time. Then I felt like I was done. So I guess for me it was that I could read it and not feel sick to my stomach. For me, that's how I knew I was done. Now, with the novel, because it's a completely different genre, I felt like I was done editing just the first few chapters. I'm probably not done editing the whole thing. My agent and the future editor will decide. But I felt like I was done at least with the first several chapters that are so important when you're trying to get published. I felt like I was done with that because other people had read it and had given me their feedback, and when they got to the end of the most current version I had, they wanted me to send in the whole thing, not because they wanted to help me edit it, but because they wanted to know what happened. And that's when I knew that I was done. And also I can read that one and not feel sick to my stomach. So.
You would say that you've got to have beta readers before you try to find an agent or an editor or get it published in any way.
That is absolutely paramount. In fact, this is something that, I've had the experience of self-publishing something for a nonprofit, and then my memoir was released with a small press. And then right now I'm under contract with Penguin Random House, and they're completely different experiences. When you're working with one of the big five, they will edit it to death. And I mean, I have to edit it obviously before I submit chapters and that type of thing. But I guess you don't feel like the burden is all on you. All right. When you're with a small press, there's a lot of editing that you do, but then you have other editors that work with you also. When you self-publish, it is all you, and there's too much going on now where people send things out or put something up, through Lightning Source or different services that Amazon offer, and you can tell that they haven't been edited. You can tell that the person just looked at it themselves. And when you send something to an agent, you want it to be as close to publishable already as possible, and that really, you cannot do that without having other people look at it. I mean, I edit other people's manuscripts. That's one of the things that I kind of do on the side, and I've been an English teacher for 20 years. You would think that, okay, well, and people have said to me, oh, well, can't you just edit your own because no, because I will see what I want to be there, and I cannot be objective with my own work. So you really, when you get it to the point where you're ready, you think you're ready to send it out to an agent, you need to be sure that at least 5 other people have seen it, and you get, even if you don't take their advice, just to get another perspective, to get a so-called virgin reader. They don't know your story. They're going to come to it the way someone would come to your book, just cold, just opening that book and seeing, do those first pages hook me, engage me, get me emotionally invested? Do I care?
Great. This is the last call for questions before we wrap up. Does anyone have anything they want to ask Jane? And Jane, are you open to personal questions like about your own process?
Sure, absolutely.
Well, I will ask one more short one while other people might text in their question. Where do you work? How long do you work? And like the number of hours a day? Do you write every day? What's your discipline?
Well, right now, because I'm working on a book that is entirely different from anything I've done. It's a book about nutrition. That's a whole other crazy story. But I write now. I'm writing every day for several hours a day because I'm under deadline. And then when I'm not writing, I'm editing. When it really just it depends on the project, and it depends on the needs of the project. So yeah, for this project, because it's a Big Five company and they need this by, it's October 19th, come hell or high water, I am writing every day for several hours a day. When I was writing and I was not under contract and it was just for myself, I was writing every day except the weekends, because my daughter didn't have school on the weekends. It was hard, and I think that if anybody out there is a mom, you can relate, and especially if you're the mom of young children, that is something that can be a challenge. So you write when they nap. You write when you ask your husband to take him to the grocery store. I would just find the time wherever I could.
Thank you. And I guess it's over to Tiffy because we didn't get any more questions. But thank you so much.
People are being shy. That's okay.
Jane, thank you so much for your presentation. It was really interesting, and I hope you had a good time. I hope the attendees enjoyed it. And the South Carolina Writers Workshop thanks you immensely.
Thank you so much for having me. And again, I'm sorry, like sometimes, we're the guinea pigs with this webinar series, and the presentation, I thought on my end it looked like that's what you were seeing, but I still kept looking up at the camera occasionally just in case it wasn't working. So I hope that you still were able to, to get a lot out of it. And if anybody wants to email, either of the moderators or myself, you can email me at janegary@gmail, sjanegary@gmail. I'd be happy to send anybody the presentation, or certainly Jenny, you can send it along to anybody who emails you and asks you for it. I'd be happy to share.
Thank you so much.
Before we go, I want to say to all of our attendees, if you were impressed, if you got anything out of today's session, would you please go to our Facebook page, SCWW Facebook page, and rave about what a great job Jane did and what a great experience this was, because this is the first in our series. We probably will have one the end of September, 1st of October. The next one's October 24th. And then November, I don't remember the dates exactly, but it's on our website. Go to the website. But please rave about this on Facebook if you enjoyed it.
Thank you all for joining us. This ends our broadcast.